The display operator deals exclusively with how your particles appear in your viewport. It's effectively a partner to the render operator, which deals with how your particles will appear at render time. You have limited options with the display operator, so let's quickly run through them. Before we do that, I'll just mention something that you may want to be aware of, and that is if you look on the README file on this disk, there's a link to Oleg Babordin's site, orbaz.com, Orbaz Technologies I think it is. And Oleg's actually the guy who wrote particle flow when he was working at Discrete. Now, Oleg's obviously producing, if you're aware of the work that he's been doing, box sets of new operators, new tests and so forth for particle flow at the moment. And another thing that Oleg's doing is he's actually releasing new versions of some of the operators that we're covering in this series of DVDs. One of the operators that he's updated is the display operator. I don't think he's actually updated the display operator itself, but he's added some extra utilities that you can use with a display operator, and that's they're very useful for when you're working with particle data with scripting and so forth. The operator in question is called DisplayScript, and you can get it over at www.orbaz, which is spelled orbaz.com/forum/. That's also a very good forum for anybody that's working with particle flow. Okay, so let's have a look at the options that we have with the current operator. The first flyout is called type, and as you can see at the moment it's set to geometry. I'll just set it to none. The first option is none, which means that you'll actually get no particles displayed in the current event. So that's not very useful, obviously, but sometimes you may want to keep the operator in place and just turn off the display of particles for whatever reason. A typical reason for this would be that maybe the particles don't render, and you're not really interested in what they're doing in that particular event, and you don't want to display them. But obviously later you may want to go back and turn it on, so you just leave the display operator in the event and just leave it set to none. The second option is dots, and I'm actually running Max in software display mode, and that's because the capture software that we're using doesn't work very well with OpenGL or DirectX. So when you're running Max in software display mode, this actually displays the dots as a very small dot, and actually that generally works better with particles, because when you're using a display of dots, you want your dots to be very small, and you want to use a lot of particles to build up a nice sort of cloud, a swarm of dots. So it's actually more pleasing to the eye generally when working in software mode. So if I scrub forward, you can probably see those dots there in the viewport. They're very small. So I'm just going to go into the particle operator here, the birth operator, and I'm going to put up the particle count to something a bit more chunky. So there you go, you can actually see now, you can see the dots a little bit more clearly. Let's put another 0 on there. There you go. Obviously very dense. But there you can see they're displaying as dots. And you can see what I mean, that the size being very small is actually quite a good thing. It gives you a really nice feeling of the sort of mass that you've got with your particles. I'll put that back down there and set the value back to let's say 2000. Okay, go back to the display operator and scrub on a bit. As you can see, with 2000 particles, you can hardly really see them. The next option, which is a little bit more chunky, is ticks, and as you can see, that just uses a cross on every particle. Obviously it's a lot more visible, so if you want to see your particles a little bit more clearly, you can use ticks. The next one is circles, which is probably, because they are circles, it's probably a little bit heavier than some of the other options to display. I very often use circles in particle flows where, for instance, I have very few master particles. Let's say I've got 20 or 30 master particles, and they then spawn other particles. I generally set those master particles to circles. That's because they're quite large, and they're a very distinctive shape, and quite often I'll use a bright color on them as well. The next option is lines, and what this option does